11. Le poète au cachot des prés maladifs, roulant en manuscrit sur son pied convulsif, mesure d'un regard que la terreur enflamme, l'escalier de vertige où s'abîme son âme. Charles Baudelaire. Note 220. Something about the terror of the staircase. Note 221. The poet, sick and with his chest half bare, tramples a manuscript in his dark stall, gazing with terror at the yawning stair, down which his spirit finally must fall. As translated by Roy Campbell. Editors. End note 221, end note 220. While Karen stayed home and Will Navidson headed for the front line, Tom spent 2 nights in no man's land. He even brought his bag and papers, though in the long run the effects of the weed would not exactly comfort him. More than likely, when Tom first stepped foot in that place, every instinct in his body screamed at him to immediately get out, race back to the living room, daylight, the happy median of his life. Unfortunately, it was not an impulse he could obey, as he was needed near the spiral staircase, in order to maintain radio contact. By his own admission, Tom is nothing like his brother. He has neither the fierce ambition nor the compulsion for risk-taking. If both brothers paid the same price for their parents' narcissism, Will relied on aggression to anchor the world, while Tom passively accepted whatever the world would give or take away. Consequently, Tom won no awards, achieved no fame, held no job for more than a year or two, remained in no relationship for longer than a few months, could not settle down in a city for longer than a few years, and ultimately had no place or direction to call his own. He drifted, bending to daily pressures, never protesting when he was deprived of what he should have rightfully claimed as his own. And in this sad trip downstream, Tom dulled the pain with alcohol and a few joints a day, what he called his friendly haze. Ironically, though, Tom is better liked than Will, physically as well as emotionally. Tom has far fewer edges than his famous brother. He is soft, easygoing, and he exudes a kind of peacefulness typically reserved for Buddhist monks. Anne Kligman's essay on Tom is nearly poetic in its brevity. In only 1.5 pages, she condenses 53 interviews with Tom's friends, all of whom speak warmly and generously of a man they admittedly did not know all that well, but nonetheless valued and in some cases appear to genuinely love. Will Navidson, on the other hand, is respected by thousands, but has never commanded the kind of gut-level affection felt for his twin brother. Note 221, Anne Kligman's The Short List in Paris Review, Spring 1995, pages 43 to 44. End note 222. A great deal of exegesis exists on the unique relationship between these two brothers, though not the first to make the comparison. Ita Rucala's treatment of Will and Tom as contemporary Esau and Jacob has become the academic standard. Rucala finds the biblical tale of twins wrestling over birthright and paternal blessing the ideal mirror in which to view Will and Tom, who, like Jacob and Esau, sadly came to share the same conclusion. Yip paredu. Note 223. They shall be separated. Editors. End note 223. Note 224. Ita Rucala's exemplary, Not True, Man. Me Atabeni. Portland, Hineni Press, May 1995, page 97. It probably should be noted that while Rucala equates Jacob with Navidson, the clean-shaven intellectual aggressively claiming his birthright, and Esau with Tom, unkempt and slightly lethargic, lumbering through life like some obtuse water buffalo, Nam Yurton, in her piece All Accurate in Panegyric, Volume 18, July 30th, 1994, draws the opposite conclusion. Isn't Navidson a hunter like Esau, actively shooting with his camera? And doesn't Tom's calm, in fact a Zen-like calm, make him much more similar to Jacob? Note, Regardless of your take on who's Navidson and who's Tom, here's a quick summary for those unfamiliar with this biblical story about twins. Esau's a hairy, dim-witted hunter. Jacob's a smooth-skinned, cunning intellectual. Daddy Isaac dotes on Esau because the kid always brings him venison. When the time finally comes for the paternal blessing, Isaac promises to give it to Esau as soon as he brings him some meat. Well, while Esau's off hunting, Jacob, with help from his mother, covers his hands with goat hair so they resemble Esau's, and then approaches his blind father with a bowl full of stew. The ruse works, and Isaac, thinking the son before him is Esau, blesses Jacob instead. When Esau returns, Isaac figures out what's happened, but tells Esau he has no second blessing for him. Esau bawls like a baby and vows to kill Jacob. Jacob runs off and meets God. Years later, the brothers meet up again, make up, but don't hang together for long. It's actually pretty sad. See Genesis, chapters 25 to 33. Endnote 224. Incredible as it may seem, Rucala's 900-page book is not one page too long. As she says herself, to adequately analyze the history of Esau and Jacob is to painstakingly exfoliate, layer by layer, the most delicate millefeuille. Note 225. Dieter Rucala's Not True Man, Mi Atabeni, page 3, endnote 225. Of course, it is also an act that could, in the end, deprive the reader of all taste for the subject. Rucala accepts this risk, recognizing that an investment in such a complex and, without exception, time-consuming array of ideas will in the end yield a taste far superior to anything experienced casually. In the chapter entitled Vayashol, Vayesht, Vayakom, Vayelech, Vayivaz, Rucala reevaluates the meaning of birthright by treating its significance as nothing more than... Note 226. What follows here is hopelessly incomplete. Denise Nyman, who is now married and lives in Tel Aviv, claims to have worked on this section when it was intact. The whole thing was really quite brilliant, she told me over the phone. I helped him a little with the Hebrew, but he really didn't need my assistance, except to write down what he said. This incredible analysis about parental blessings, sibling rivalry, birthright, and all the time quoting from memory entire passages from the most obscure books. He possessed a pretty uncanny ability to recite verbatim almost anything he'd read, and let me tell you, he'd read a lot. Incredible character. It took us about 2 weeks to write everything he had to say about Esau and Jacob. Then I read it back to him. He made corrections, and we eventually got around to a second draft, which I felt was pretty polished. She took a deep breath. I could hear a baby crying in the background. Then, one day, I arrived at his place, and the pages had vanished. Also, all his fingers were bandaged. He mumbled something about falling, scraping up his hands. At first, he ignored me when I asked him about our work, but when I persisted, he muttered something like, "What difference does it make? They're dead anyway, right? Or not alive, however you want to look at it." I told him I didn't understand, so he just said it was too personal, an unrealized theme, poorly executed, a complete mess. He did grunt something about there never having been a blessing to begin with, which I thought was pretty interesting. No birthright. All of it a misleading ploy. Both brothers fools. And as for the comparison to the Navidson twins, he suddenly claimed it was justifiable only if you could compare any pair of siblings to Israel and his brother. Zampano was clearly upset, so I tried fixing him something to eat. He eventually came around, and we read some books on meteors. I figured that was that, except when I went to the bathroom, I found the pages. Or I should say I found what was left of them. He had torn them to shreds. They were in the wastebasket, some strewn on the floor, no doubt a fair share lost down the toilet. As I started to pick them up, I also discovered that most of the pieces were stained with blood. I never learned what seizure caused him to rip it all apart, but for whatever reason, I was overcome by my own impulse to save what was left. Not for me, really, but for him. I stuffed all the crumpled bits into my pockets and later transferred them to a manila envelope, which I placed at the bottom of that chest. I guess I hoped he'd find it one day and realize his mistake. Unfortunately, Zampano never did, though for what it's worth, I did. bits of blood-stained paper, just like Denise Nyman said, all suggesting the same theme, but somehow never quite fitting back together. On more than a few occasions, I even considered excluding all this. In the end, though, I opted to transcribe the pieces, which I figured had enough on them to have some meaning, even if that meant not meaning much to me. One thing's for sure, it did disturb me. There's just something so creepy about all the violence and blood. I mean, over what? This? Arcane, obtuse, and way over the top wannabe scholarship. Is that what got to him? Or was it something else? Maybe it really was too personal. Maybe he had a brother, a son. Maybe he had two sons, who knows? But here it is, all that's left. Incoherent scrap. Too bad so much of his life had to slip between the lines of even his own words. Endnote 226. But the Lord Yahweh, that too oft accused literalist, instructs Rebekah in the subtler ways of language by using irony. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Genesis 25, 23 to 24. Chalmers underline. On one hand, Yahweh announces a hierarchy of age, and on the other hand claims the children are the same age. Note 227. Tobias Chalmers, Jay's Ironic Postures, London, University Press, 1954, page 92. Chalmers, however, fails to take into account Genesis 25, 25 to 26. Endnote 227. Esau comes from the root ash, meaning to hurry, while Yaakov comes from the root akav, which means to delay or to restrain. Note 228. Norman J. Cohen's Self, Struggle, and Change, Family Conflict Stories in Genesis and Their Healing Insights for Our Lives. Woodstock, Vermont, Jewish Lights Publishing, 1995, page 98. Endnote 228. I.e., Esau entered the world first, Jacob last. But Esau is also connected to Asa, meaning to cover, while Jacob derives from Akab, meaning heel, i.e. Esau was covered in hair, Jacob born clutching Esau's heel, restraining him. Note 229, Robert Davidson's Genesis 12 to 50, Cambridge University Press, 1979, page 122, end note 229. At least Fried Cashon convincingly objects to Rucala's comparison when he points out how really Holloway, not Tom, is the hairy one. His beard, surly appearance, and even his profession as a hunter make Holloway the perfect Esau. The tension between Navidson and Holloway is also more on par with the tension between Jacob and his brother. Note 230, Fried Cashon's Esau, Birmingham, Alabama, Mavar Yabok Press, 1996, page 159. Endnote 230. The degree of Esau and Jacob's struggle is emphasized by the word va yitrozu, which comes from the root ruz, meaning to tear apart, to shatter. The comparison falters, however, when one realizes Will and Tom never indulged in such a violent struggle. During their childhood, Tom and Will were seldom apart. They gave each other support, encouragement, and the strength to persevere in the face of parental indifference. Note 231, Terry Borowska interview. Endnote 231. Of course, their intertwining adolescent years eventually unraveled as they reached adulthood. Will pursuing photography and fame in an attempt to fill the emotional void, Tom drifting into an unremarkable and for the most part internal existence. Tom, however, never hid behind the adjunct meaning of a career. He never acquired the rhetoric of achievement. In fact, his life never moved much beyond the here and now. Nevertheless, in spite of a brutal struggle with alcoholism, Tom did manage to preserve his sense of humor and, in his 12-step program, inspired many admirers who to this day speak highly of him. Of the hard times that came his way, he experienced the greatest grief during those 8 years when he was estranged from his brother, or, in his words, when the old rug was pulled out from under old Tom. It is hardly a coincidence that during this period he succumbed to chemical dependencies, went on unemployment, and prematurely ended a budding relationship with a young schoolteacher. The Navidson record never explains what came between Tom and Will, although it implies Tom envied Navy's success and was increasingly dissatisfied with his own accomplishments. Note 232. Personal interviews with Damien Searle, Annabelle Witten, and Isaac Hodge, February 5th to 23rd, 1995. Endnote 232. In his article, Brothers in Arms No More, published in the Village Voice, Carlos Brion observes that Tom and Will's estrangement began with the birth of Chad. While it's complete speculation on my part, I wonder if the large amount of energy required to raise a family pulled Will's attention away from his brother. Suddenly, Tom discovered his brother, his only supporter and sympathizer, was devoting more and more time to his son. Tom may have felt abandoned. Note 233. Lost. Endnote 233. Annabelle Witten echoes these sentiments when she points out how Tom occasionally referred to himself as orphaned at the age of 40. Note 234. Lost. Endnote 234. The year Tom, and Will for that matter, turned 40 was the year Chad was born. Ironically enough, Tom's presence in the house on Ashtree Lane only served to help Will and Karen get along. As Witten states, Tom's desire to reacquire his lost parental figures transmuted Navidson into father and Karen into mother, thus offering one explanation why Tom frequently sought to reduce tension between both. Note 235. Ebid 112. Endnote 235. Of course, as Nam Uritan argued, why? Because Tom's a nice guy. Note 236, Nam Uritan's All Accurate, page 176. End note 236. Esau's blessing was stolen with a mask. Tom wears no mask. Will wears a camera. But as Nietzsche wrote, every profound spirit needs a mask. Note 237. Of some note is the strange typo which appears in the Aaron Stern text. But the blind Isaac repeated his question, "Are you really my son, Esau?" To which the chosen one replied, "Ani," meaning I am. Aaron Stern's All God's Children, Genesis, New York, Hesed Press, 1964, page 62. Endnote 237. And yet, despite the triumph of Jacob's ruse, he should have heeded this admonition. Cursed be he that maketh the blind to wander out of the way. Deuteronomy 27:18. And Jacob was indeed cursed, forced to wrestle for the rest of his life with this question of self-worth. Note 238. From the Robert Davidson commentary. Jacob wrestled with an unidentified man who turned out to be God, wrestled and lived to tell the tale. Gathered into the story are so many curious elements that we can only assume that here is a story which has taken many centuries to reach its present form, and which is assimilated material, some of it very primitive, which goes back long before the time of Jacob. It is like an old house, which has had additions built onto it, and has been restored and renovated more than once during the passing years. Page 184. Endnote 238. Navidson was no different. Note 239. Lost. Endnote 239. Three horizontal lines struck through with a diagonal line. Rzz. To me, Tom seemed an incredibly peaceful man. Plain, decent, but most of all peaceful. Note 240. Ibid. And note 240. Rzz. Here Ricala's analysis unexpectedly rereads the meaning of Esau's lost inheritance, sublimely uncovering an unspoken history, veiled in irony and blankness, yet still describing how one brother could not have succeeded without the other. Cain may not have been his brother's keeper, but Esau certainly was. Note 241, Ibid, and note 241. Rzz. A cunning hunter of the field. Plain man dwelling in tents. Note 242. See Genesis 27:24. Note 243. Wrong. See Genesis 27:29. Note 244. Mr. Truant also appears to be in error. The correct reference is Genesis 25:27. Editors. End notes 244, 243, 242. Rzz. This then is the meaning of Esau. Rzz. As Sholem writes, Frank's ultimate vision of the future was based upon the still unrevealed laws of the Torah of Atzilut, which he promised his disciples would take effect once they had come to Esau, that is, when the passage through the abyss, with its unmitigated destruction and negation, was finally accomplished. Note 245. Gershom Scholem's The Messianic Idea in Judaism. New York, Schocken Books, 1971, page 133. In taking the time to consider Frank's work, Scholem does not fail to also point out Frank's questionable character. Jacob Frank, 1726-91, will always be remembered as one of the most frightening phenomena in the whole Jewish history. A religious leader who, whether for purely self-interested motives or otherwise, was in all his actions a truly corrupt and degenerate individual. Page 126. Endnote 245. But as a great Hasidic maxim reminds us, the Messiah will not come until the tears of Esau have ceased. Note 246. Lost. End note 246. And so returns to Tom and Will Navidson, divided by experience, endowed with different talents and dispositions, yet still brothers, and not without the other. As Ricala states in her concluding chapter, while the differences are there, like the serpents of the caduceus, these two brothers have always been, and always will be, inextricably intertwined, and just like caduceus, their shared history creates a meaning, and that meaning is health. Note 247, Ita Ricala, page 897. But it also means rest missing. End note 247. By the end of the first night, Tom has begun to feel the terrible strain of that place. At one point, he even threatens to abandon his post. He does not. His devotion to his brother triumphs over his own fears. Remaining by the radio, Tom gnaws on boredom like a dog gnawing on a bone, while all the time eyeing fear like a mongoose. Note 248, Ibid, page 249, and note 248. Fortunately for us, some trace of this struggle survives on his high 8, where Tom recorded an eclectic, sometimes funny, sometimes bizarre history of thoughts passing away in the atrocity of that darkness. Tom's story. Transcript. Day 1, 10:38. Outside Tom's tent, breath frosting in the air. Who am I kidding? A place like this has to be haunted. That's what happened to Holloway and his team. The ghosts got him. That's what will happen to Navy and me. The ghosts will get us. Except he's with Breston. He's not alone. I'm alone. That just figures. Ghosts always go first for the one who's alone. In fact, I bet they're here right now, lurking. Day 1, 12:06. In order to maintain contact, it was necessary to set up the radio outside of the tent. Radio, Navidson. Tom, we found another neon marker. Most of it's gone, just a shred. We're laying down line and proceeding. Tom into radio. Okay, Navy. See any ghosts? Radio, Navidson. Nothing. You a little spooked? Tom, lighting up a fat one. Radio, Navidson. If it gets too much for you, go back. We'll be all right. Tom, fuck yourself, Navy. Radio, Navidson. What? Tom, doesn't he go around autographing light bulbs? Radio, Navidson. Who? Tom, what? Radio, Navidson. What? Tom, never mind. Over, out, whatever. Changing channels. Tom, Karen, this is Tom. Radio, Karen. I would hope so. How's Navy? Tom, he's fine. Found another marker. Radio, Karen. And Billy? Tom, fine too. Radio, Karen. How are you managing? Tom, me? I'm cold. I'm scared shitless. And I feel like I'm about to be eaten alive at any moment. Otherwise, I'd say I'm fine. Day 1, 1546. American listeners will have to deal with army time. Inside tent. Okay, Mr. Monster, I know you're there and you're planning to eat me, and there's nothing I can do about that. But I should warn you, I've lived for years on fast food, greasy fries, more than a few polyurethane shakes. I smoke a lot of weed, too. Got a pair of lungs blacker than road tar. My point being, Mr. Monster, I don't taste so good. Day 1, 1838, outside tent. This is ridiculous. I don't belong here. No one belongs here. Fuck you, Navy, for bringing me here. I'm a slob. I like lots of food. These things I consider accomplishments. I am not a hero. I'm not an adventurer. I am Tom the Slow, Tom the Chunky, Tom the Stoned, Tom about to be eaten by Mr. Monster. Where are you, Mr. Monster, you stinking bastard? Sleeping on the job? Day 1, 2109, outside tent. I'm sick. I'm freezing to death. I'm going. He throws up. This is not fun. This isn't fair. Pause. I think there's a game on tonight. Day 1, 2341, outside tent. Tom. What kind of voices? Radio, Karen. Daisy doesn't know. Chad said they sounded like a few people, but he couldn't understand what they were saying. Tom. Book me a flight to the Bahamas. Radio, Karen. Are you kidding? Book a flight for the whole family. This is absurd. Tom. Where's that bottle of bourbon when you need it? Pause. Hey, I better sign off. Don't want a bunch of dead batteries on my hands. Radio, Karen. Tell him I love him, Tom. Tom. I already did. Day 2, 11 after midnight. Outside tent, smoking a joint. I call this a little bedtime story for Tom. A long time ago, there was this captain, and he was out sailing the high seas when one of his crew spotted a pirate ship on the horizon. Right before the battle began, the captain cried out, "Bring me my red shirt." It was a long fight, but in the end, the captain and his crew were victorious. The next day, 3 pirate ships appeared. Once again, the captain cried out, "Bring me my red shirt," and once again, the captain and his men defeated the pirates. That evening, everyone was sitting around, resting and taking care of their wounds, when an ensign asked the captain why he always put on his red shirt before battle. The captain calmly replied, "I wear the red shirt so that if I'm wounded, no one will see the blood. That way everyone will continue to fight on unafraid." All the men were moved by this great display of courage. Well, the next day, 10 pirate ships were spotted. The men turned to their captain and waited for him to give his usual command. Calm as ever, the captain cried out, "Bring me my brown pants!" Day 2, 10:57. Inside tent. Radio Navidson. Tom? Static. Tom, you read me? Tom, going outside to the radio. What time is it? Looking at his watch. 11 a.m. Jesus, did I sleep well. Radio Navidson. Still no sign, except for... Static. Marcus... Static. Over. Tom. Say again, Navy. You're fading. Day 2, 12:03. Outside tent. This punker gets on a bus and takes a seat. His hair's all green. He's got brightly coloured tattoos covering his arms and piercings all over his face. Feathers hang from each earlobe. Across the aisle sits an old man who proceeds to stare at him for the next 15 miles. Eventually, the punker gets pretty unnerved and blurts out, "Hey man, didn't you do anything crazy when you were young?" Without missing a beat, the old man replies, "Yeah, when I was in the Navy, I got drunk one night in Singapore and had sex with a bird of paradise. I was just wondering if you were my son." Day 2, 13:27. Outside tent. I feel like I'm in a goddamned refrigerator, that's what. So what I want to know is, where's all the goddamn food? God knows I could use a drink. Day 2, 14:11. Inside tent. A monk joins an abbey, ready to dedicate his life to copying ancient books by hand. After the first day, though, he reports to the head priest. He's concerned that all the monks have been copying from copies made from still more copies. If someone makes a mistake, he points out, it would be impossible to detect. Even worse, the error would continue to be made. A bit startled, the priest decides that he better check their latest effort against the original, which is kept in a vault beneath the abbey, a place only he has access to. Well, 2 days, then 3 days pass without the priest resurfacing. Finally, the new monk decides to see if the old guy's all right. When he gets down there, though, he discovers the priest hunched over both a newly copied book and the ancient original text. He is sobbing, and by the look of things has been sobbing for a long time. "Father," the monk whispers. "Oh, Lord Jesus," the priest wails. "The word is celebrate." Day 2, 15:29. Outside tent, smoking a joint. Coughing. Coughing again. Did you expect oration, Mr. Monster? Or maybe just a little expectoration? Coughs and spits. Navy taught me that one. Day 2, 15:49. Outside tent. Tom. Hey, Karen, I've got a bit of the munchies going on here. Do you think you could order me a pizza? Radio Karen. What? Tom. When the delivery boy comes to the door, just tell him to take it to the fat guy at the end of the hall, 2 miles down on the left. Radio Karen. Pause. Tom, maybe you should come back. Tom. No maybe about it. Is there any lemon meringue left? Day 2, 16:01. Inside tent. There once was a poor man who walked around without shoes. His feet were covered in calluses. One day, a rich man felt sorry for the poor man and bought him a pair of Nikes. The poor man was extremely grateful and wore the shoes constantly. Well, after a year or so, the shoes fell apart. So the poor man had to go back to running around barefoot. Only now, all his calluses were gone and his feet got all cut up. And soon the cuts became infected and the man got sick, and eventually, after they cut off his legs, he died. I call that particular story Love, Death, and Nike. A real cheer-me-up story for Mr. Monster. That's right, all for you. Oh, and something else. Fuck you, Mr. Monster. Day 2, 16:42. Outside tent. The 7 dwarves went to the Vatican. and when the Pope answered the door, Dopey stepped forward. "Your Excellency," he said, "I wonder if you could tell me if there are any dwarf nuns in Rome." "No, Dopey, there aren't," the Pope replied. Behind Dopey, the 6 dwarves started to titter. "Well, are there any dwarf nuns in Italy?" Dopey persisted. "No, none in Italy," the Pope answered, a little more sternly. A few of the dwarves now began to laugh more openly. "Well, are there any dwarf nuns in Europe?" This time the Pope was much more firm. "Dopey, there are no dwarf nuns in Europe." By this point, all the dwarves were laughing aloud and rolling around on the ground. "Pope," Dopey demanded, "are there any dwarf nuns in the whole world?" "No, Dopey," the Pope snapped. "There are no dwarf nuns anywhere in the world." Whereupon the 6 dwarves started jumping up and down, chanting, "Dopey fucked a penguin, Dopey fucked a penguin." Day 2, 1716, outside tent. Here's a riddle. Who makes a better house? A framer, a welder, a form builder? Give up? A grave maker, 'cause his house lasts until Judgment Day. Okay, that's a stupid joke. An old Sunday school joke, actually. Day 2, 1828, inside tent. Now Mr. Monster looks like a frog, a little gribbit frog, when suddenly, little frog has become a piglet. By carefully positioning his halogen lamp, Tom is able to cast hand shadows on the back wall of his tent. He conjures up a whole menagerie of creatures. Yes, a piggy-wiggy creature just oinking along when, an elephant. Look at that. The piglet has turned into an elephant. Jesus, and look at the size of that elephant. It could... Oops, well, it's turned into a woodpecker. Oh, now it's a snail. Or how about a praying mantis? A sea urchin? A dove, maybe? A tiger? Or even this. A wascally wabbit. And then all of a sudden, oh no, Mr. Monster, don't do that. But Mr. Monster does, turning into a dragon. Yep, that's right, folks. A mean, no-game-playing, flesh-eating dragon. And you say you want to eat me? Sure, except for one thing. Just when Mr. Monster thinks he's going to turn Tom the Hefty into Tom the Short Rib, Tom unleashes his secret weapon. As the dragon on the tent wall turns toward Tom and opens its mouth, Tom gets ready to turn off the halogen with his foot. Aha, Mr. Monster. Bye-bye, baby. Click. Black.